Welcome back to our panel discussion, Enhancing Employee Engagement, Best Practices for Government, sponsored by Cornerstone On Demand here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Julie Brill, the Manager of Work-Life Leadership and Executive Development Policy at the Office of Personnel Management. Philippe Lussier is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Human Resources. Jeff Marootian is the Assistant Secretary of Administration at the Transportation Department. Towanda Brooks, the Chief Human Capital Officer at Housing and Urban Development. And Steve Dobberowsky, Principal for Thought Leadership and Advisory Services at Cornerstone On Demand. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's talk about some of the tools, technologies, techniques that can help agency leadership, agency management work on enhancing that employee engagement. And Steve, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So as part of the conversation we had in the first session, I think it's critical that when we talk engagement, we realize that one of the foundational things is trust, right? And so how do we actually establish trust between employers and employees? First, I think Towanda hit it on the head last time when we talked about culture. It's knowing your culture. It's alignment of the actual mission to the actual individual performance goals of the individual employee. I remember a supervisor of mine a long time ago told me, you know, you want to have an organization like NASA had an organization where they had their mission, and they went and interviewed employees to see if they understood what it is that they did. They asked the janitor who was sweeping the floor, you know, what is it that you do? And he's like, I put people on the moon. I put people in this space. Well, you're just a janitor. No, that's what I do. And that's really true alignment when we start talking about it. But it's also knowing your learning styles, knowing your work styles, how and where we work are important in terms of identity and culture. So I think that that's critical as well. I think the way we communicate is also very critical in terms of employee engagement. Be clear and concise, making sure that we actually have resources that are supporting our employees when we go through periods of transition or confusion, or we are going through some change. So I think the communication style and pattern has to be known and adapted to the employees. And then finally, I think the thing that is probably the most critical is transparency, and making sure that we're explaining why it is that we're doing what we're doing. There are a number of tools and techniques that you can actually use that. Obviously, in Cornerstone, we believe that a unified talent management, where we're doing our learning management, how we're learning, how we're doing our performance, how we're succeeding and building our talent pools, is critical. And I think that those categories or those tools provide an into how we do things. What does it take to qualify for certain positions? What skills or competencies do you need? And it's very transparent, and we can communicate it. All those things then align, leading to greater engagement.
Towanda, you look like you agree.
I do. Absolutely. Without a doubt. And that's one of the things that we're really working hard towards at HUD, and it's tied into everything that we're doing. So we have an HR end-to-end system, but that's just a part of it. Our engagement plans are tied to our human capital plan, our workforce plan, our strategic plan. Over the last couple years, we've been working very, very hard to get those, not only the documents in place, but tying it to everything and making sure that it's very transparent to our leadership, our senior executives. So we're building it as a enterprise, so that our senior executives know what the documents are. So we started with our strategic plan, and our agency, our executives know what the strategic plan. We had meetings where they were involved in it. Our employees know. We had meetings where they were able to stand at stations and comment on the strategic plan. So then the executives went through the strategic plan. So everybody had an opportunity to comment on the strategic plan. So that was built. And then we worked on our human capital plan. So that's done. Our workforce plan is done. Our succession plan is done. So all of those things were completed. And now we just finished our building our workforce planning tool. So that workforce planning tool is done. We have a succession planning tool. So all of these things were done in succession. And so we can actually start using these tools in in order. So we're training our senior executives and piloting these things so that we can actually do the workforce planning and engage our workforce in the right way. And our senior executives now have engagement in their performance plans, and our supervisors and managers have engagement in their workforce plan. In their performance plans, excuse me. So it's all a part of building it into the workforce and the culture, so that as an organization, as a department, we're building it into the culture so that it's not just slammed there, so it doesn't feel right. It's gradually being built into the culture so it feels right. And it's our secretary and our deputy secretary and all the assistant secretaries are talking about it, and it's being continually talked about. Our chief learning officer is having meetings and putting the information out there so that employees hear it. So it's being built out, and it feels really good. So
I think that's really critical, Tom and Towanda. I think that it's not a secret that the things that we're doing have an impact. And so what HUD is actually doing, everyone's doing this, right? We're doing learning management, we're doing performance management, we're doing succession planning, workforce planning to some extent. It's now taking all of those pieces and making informed decisions to your workforce. I can now then forecast what's going to happen. If this individual is a high performer, he's or she is taking training, and these are good things that we can then reinforce as an agency. And then you have that information already. Now, why not do stuff with it and let it inform the decisions that you make?
The one tool that I want to add to the conversation is performance management. Every supervisor is supposed to have that regular performance management feedback conversation. And OPM is really emphasizing how engagement is tied to performance feedback. And we are emphasizing get out of that structure that you confine yourself in terms of that annual performance feedback, and make those conversations more regular, make them immediate, so that if someone's doing something well, give them that immediate praise and feedback. It's not rocket science. And if they're not doing something so well, take that opportunity for a coaching conversation and get to know each individual in terms of their strengths and what they can bring to the mission, and really expand performance management beyond the very confining tool that we've used traditionally.
Well, Tom, I agree with everything that's been said here, both Steve and Julie and Towanda. The one of the things I want to mention and mention a specific example where we're beginning to adopt a tool set. I think all of us are using this, but performance management is critical. But underlying both performance management and talent management, on a larger scale, is competencies. We have a collection of bureaus. Collectively, they're known as the T bureaus, but they basically do non-proliferation, arms control, and manage our our relationship with DOD. So these three collective bureaus have a very, very senior workforce, almost double the retirement eligible population of any other workforce that we have. And there's there's physical scientists, nuclear engineers, chemical engineers, a very technical workforce. We had never laid out these kinds of technical competency models for each position. And this is where the engagement comes in, is employees want to be involved in the solution set. They don't want to just say, here's the answer. So hundreds, I would say, of focus groups laying out the different competency models and then assessing the workforce against these competencies models. And then so there's two pieces of it. How do you manage the talent you already have to grow the pipeline, and how do you bring in new employees? And these competencies are a real critical part of that. And what the employees get out of that is you get a roadmap, you get a career guide. So if I'm here at this position, at this grade level, I'm a GS9 and I want to be a GS11 or a GS12, now we have web tools where you can hover over certain jobs and you can find out, well, these are the competencies I need to develop, here's the training I can get, here's some developmental programs, and it really gives employees a career path, and that's really what they're thirsting for, is how do I get from point A to point B?
And Jeff, so that seems to, what we're hearing is that there's almost an infrastructure of tools and document integration lying underneath the employee engagement that's really important to support that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've heard from a few responses here, which is just important to highlight, is that the process for us is really driven by our employees. The strategic planning process in and of itself is a reflection of their ideas, their thoughts, their own planning, and we collect that information in a number of ways. And I just want to talk about one tool that we use that with a fair amount of success, which is called Idea Hub. I know other agencies use a similar iteration of that. And really, it's just an opportunity for our employees to share with us their ideas about a number of issues, and for other employees to comment and to essentially vote on which ideas they feel are the strongest. And that's an opportunity for us to hear directly from employees that we might not otherwise hear from directly, and to incorporate their feedback into the work that we're doing.
All right, interesting. Steve, further comment.
Just one thing I also want to say, technologies are important in the way we actually do this. It's important to realize how we move to technologies and how we automate these. It's not enough just to take a process and automate it. It's really critical that you actually think through that and you innovate what makes the most amount of sense in how you actually automate this. There was a study by ICF and the National Academy of Public Administration this year that came out and said that 81% realized that they are automating their processes, but only 7% of those are actually innovating in the way that they actually automate those processes. So it's important to have the technology, but it's also critical that we think of how we're actually automating those, and is it the way that makes the most amount of sense? When we talk performance management, how often is it true where we set performance goals in the beginning and they're the same at the end of the year, right? They often change. Work priorities change. And so how do we become flexible and fluid to allow for that to take place?
So there's a certain dynamism that has to be built into this whole thing.
Correct.
I want to ask about training a little bit, because training is, the cliche goes, well, training budgets are the first to go. But training is one thing. Planning the right training for people, and I think a couple of people touched on that like in that roadmap for their work life, is attended by training opportunities and requirements that they'll need. What's the best way to tie in training available with what people are doing in terms of workforce planning, their career planning, which together can add up to better engagement? Julie, you want to try that one?
Sure. I'll take that one. First, training and development's key driver of engagement. So that is important to employees, that their leaders care about their training. And then agencies like state and others who start with providing them the roadmap, here are the competencies you need to do the job well now, as well as grow in your career, is important. And we've recently put out a similar competency-based framework for leaders and supervisors, because if we're going to improve engagement long-term, we need to have supervisors and managers with those leadership competencies. They really need to not be selected based on how well they did as a subject matter expert. They need to have those leadership competencies as well.
Which means a little training for some of the old lions is not a bad idea either.
Well, exactly. And new lions, too. But, building
Pride
on...
of the agency, you might say.
Oh, nice. Pride. But building on the competency models, once you get to the top of your career ladder, then you're looking to either go into supervision or not. And having those leadership competencies laid out helps them. But then also, as a new supervisor, what is it you need to know right away so that you're not swimming, among the sharks? You're hitting the ground running and doing well. So. And then supervisors can care for the employees' career growth as well.
Yeah, go ahead. I wanted to ask Towanda about that same question, because now that you're in this kind of fast-forward mode.
I think it was we have a plan. Our Chief Learning Officer at HUD has been doing a really good job of assessing our employees. So we have a couple of categories. We have the federal-wide mission-critical occupations, and we've been assessing those for a couple of years now, and we've built the career paths for our federal-wide mission-critical occupations. Those are the IT specialists, the accountants, and the HR specialists, and then we have our HUD-wide mission-critical occupations, and we're about a little over 50% complete of doing the assessments and building the career paths for those. So we're continually doing those. And it's really important that we continue to complete those because, in the EVS, surveys, I'm given a real opportunity to improve my skills in the organization. My training skills are assessed. We have to make sure that we continue to do that to show employees that we are taking their comments and their participation in the EVS seriously, and we want to make sure that we're listening to them and getting it done because we want them to be able to accomplish the mission. So we are moving forward with assessing their skills and putting the proper training in place. And one of the things that we're doing, we're using multiple avenues to get training accomplished because a lot of our, over 3/4 of our employees are in the field. So we're using different ways of getting them trained. So not all training is going to be facilitated in a classroom setting. So we're using different types of modes of getting them trained to make sure they get quality training. Julie mentioned that we have a new framework for our new supervisor training and then refresher training. So we've used that framework to put a new supervisor and manager training policy in place. So we've done that very quickly because we know how important it is for our supervisors to be good supervisors, not just good, great supervisors, because they're the front line for our employees, and you have to have good supervisors in place for our employees. So we're taking it very seriously and want them to have the skills because they want to have the skills. And it's difficult, to be a good supervisor when you're actually doing a lot of the work because we're not hiring like we were. I mean, we used to be a very large organization, and we're down to about 8,000 employees where we used to be 10,000, 12,000, and down to 8,000. So our managers are working managers. So we want to make sure that they actually are supported by leadership as well. So we need to give them the right tools to be able to do their jobs. So.
All right. On that note, thank you. We will take a short break here. Towanda Brooks is the Chief Human Capital Officer at Housing and Urban Development. Our other guests today are Julie Brill, the Manager of Work-Life Leadership and Executive Development Policy at the Office of Personnel Management. Steve Dobberowsky is the Principal for Thought Leadership and Advisory Services at Cornerstone On Demand. Philippe Lussier is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Human Resources, and Jeff Marootian, the Assistant Secretary of Administration at the Transportation Department. And I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, on Enhancing Employee Engagement, Best Practices for Government, sponsored by Cornerstone On Demand, here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.